So we're now at the end of the story, which is not really the end of the story, but the next phase of the story. Finally, the Eved Avraham takes Rivka along. They come to ask her. We're in chapter 24, and up to we read the last thing we saw was verse 49, where he makes the pitch. And now, tell me if you're going to accede to my request, not a demand, but a request. Now that he's given the whole story and the whole background, and of course the response is Hashem yatsa davar. Oh, sorry, Karen, you did. I'm sorry. I just saw this flash in front of me. Okay, Karen Kaplan, thank you so much for sponsoring today's shiur. I'm very honored.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
It means a lot. And thank you for helping our shul, and thank you for your excellent writing and all the wonderful things that you do. And we should continue to learn together for many, many years. That's your bracha to me. It's my bracha back to you. We should be zocha to learn together for many, many good years to come.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I have it on my calendar, but
I was making sure I had the day right.
You got the date right. Just popped up right now. So it wasn't also in memory, was it?
No.
No, it was just
for
in
you.
honor of. Thank you. Very kind.
You're
Very
welcome.
nice. Lovely. So now back to regularly scheduled programming. Lavan and Betuel seem to say, well, all right, well, it's from God. What can we do? Rivka is before you. You could take her, but maybe, he's very happy. And now he gives her presumably the Nedunya. He's giving her the various elements of gifts, which now have more symbolic meaning in terms of representing some kind of, I don't know what the word is, some kind of betrothal in a certain way. He's a shaliach. Rashi very beautifully tells us the migdanot, the migadim, the delights that he brought. It's shehivimo minei peirot shel Eretz Yisrael, fruits from the land of Israel. Even then, even in one of the first stories about Jewish people, just to get a fruit from Eretz Yisrael was a big deal. And that's what he gives her. And what's very beautiful about this, of course, is it is something that he gives her all these jewels, and we're going to take it back. But the gift that he gives to her brother and to her mother, that's, I leave you a gift from Eretz Yisrael that you should be able to keep. It on one level is perishable, and some do read that, the Bechor Shor, the Chizkuni say, well, he gave her something perishable, kind of say, you're not getting any more wealth. That's what I'm giving you. And you have that also in the Maharil Diskin and the Meshech Chochma. To contrast, they thought they were going to get a payout, but instead of a payout, they got some fruit. But I think if you just read Rashi, give them Param Eretz Yisrael. It's very beautiful. Shelley, you wanted to ask? Go ahead, please. Shelley?
If it's just that the fruits of Israel are so wonderful, why would you give them to those two people who couldn't care less?
Well, maybe they could care less. He gave them delights from Eretz Yisrael. It's a great thing. Now, did they have an appreciation for it? Yeah, they might not have. And you could also fairly ask, well, why didn't he give it to Rivka? The answer is because Rivka's going to live in Eretz Yisrael. She's on the way. So, but
doesn't it depend on whether you think where you put their degree of righteousness?
Yeah, because I don't put it so high. Do you? I mean, based on what we've learned so far, it seems like
about Eretz Yisrael, it's not going to have any sanctity to them. The fruit's not going to have any sanctity to them. You're almost setting up a Kiddush Hashem. I mean, not a Kiddush Hashem, a Chilul Hashem. So why would you do
Hashem? They're gonna eat it. They're not gonna eat it. They're gonna like it. They're not gonna like it. The point was, we have the word migdanot. What is that? What did he give them? He didn't give them wealth. So what did he give them? Yeah. So he gave them something. He gave them fruit. But where did the fruit come from? The point is, to me, it's more a statement about Rashi. You understand that Rashi, who never set foot in Eretz Yisrael, in like everyone else throughout our history, venerates and exalts Eretz Yisrael. When his eyes see in the Chumash, he sees the word of migdanot, delights, like some kind of fruit, is Eretz Yisrael. It's not like he bought it at the marketplace here. It's to him, he's bringing something some delights that come from from Eretz Yisrael.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Rabbi, it also could be that it was something that you couldn't get
Oh,
anywhere but from Israel. If you remember later when Yaakov sends things to Paro to help his sons, he sent gifts from Israel that couldn't be gotten in Egypt. They were very highly valued.
very nice. Excellent point. Yeah, there's a history of it, and but the first example of it seems to be here. The Eved Avram gives this over to them, and there's only one last sticking point in this story, of course, which is they say after all this conversation where they have made the decision, and then they wake up the next day, and what do the mother and the brother say? Well, we should wait, but we'll give her like a few years before she goes. Yamim here, the Mefarshim mostly maintain Yamim or Asor means a year, maybe 10 months, something like that. It doesn't mean Yamim like literally days. So we should wait a little bit, and then she could go. And what does he say? Don't delay me. God has made me successful till now. Send me, and I will go to my master. He kind of, as we've seen through the story, he's primed the pump. He's told them a story in which the inexorable march of the story is to get this person who's been identified already and bring her back to be a mate for Yitzchak Avinu. And he makes no bones about the fact that, now that he's set it up as such, he's basically pulling out, and now you're going to stop the success that Hashem has already given me, that you yourselves have acknowledged. So what do they say? If nothing left to say, let's ask her. So Vayomer Nikra Na'arav Nishlai Pia Vayikru Rivka Vayomer Elea Hatelchi Ma'ish Hazeh Vatomer Eleich. I just want to point out one other little, just a stylistic piece, for lack of a better term, but it was the language, the formulation. Karen, I'll turn over to you in a moment. And that is, when are names being used and when are names not being used? When do we have pronouns, things of that nature? When is someone named and therefore a subject? And when are they, or on the road to being a subject, if not an actual subject? And when are they just being described as an object? So, for instance, if you just to look at the sort of the tableau, tarte mashma, the tableau, the picture, and the tableau, the table, you have here the Eved whose name never appears. The whole story is very self-effacing. He gives Rivka the wealth, but he gives the gifts to her brother and her mother, not named. We know his name is Lavan. He's not named. Then they all eat, he and the people with him. They're never named either. Then they sleep over. Then he gets up and he says, please send me back to my master. And then the brother and the mother still doesn't say Lavan. He could have just said that. Let the girl stay here, the Na'ara. She should stay with us. So please, God has, he says to them, don't delay me, etc. So let's call the girl. There's a certain distancing that's taking place here, even in the language. And what happens? Vayikru Rivka. They called Rivka. Now she's named, right? They said to her, will you go? They don't use her name with him, right? She answers, I will go. Now Vayishalchu et Rivka achotam, their sister Rivka, vet minikta, her nursemaid, right? Which could be literally a nursemaid, or it could be the person who was her nursemaid, became her governess, who's now her lady in waiting, something like that. But Eved Avram Vet Anashav, right? This person who later on in the Torah, we learn her name is Devorah. We don't even hear it here. We find out her name in Parshat Vayishlach, much later, right? When Rivka passed away, it also mentions the Mineket Rivka died. And there's a whole question, why is it mentioned there? Not for this moment, but just something to consider. Okay, Karen, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not muted. Something that struck me a little off, but it's just a quick comment, is that we have all of these pages after pages after pages describing what's happening with Eliezer, who's called an Eved. And I came across something, I think in Nechama Leibowitz, about how the words of the servants of the patriarchs bring more pleasure to Hashem than later on.
Right,
and
she's quoting Chazal. We learned that. We saw it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I forgot we learned it.
No, but it's good. You might not have been on that shir, but it's a beautiful formulation. That's Yafes Sichatan Shel Avdei Avot Yoter Mitoratan Shel Banim. right? We learn more from the conversation, common conversation, the servants of the patriarchs than the
Mhm.
Torah of the children.
And she had some combination that I can't remember about all the repetition here and all the repetition we're getting right now in the weekly Parsha about building the Mishkan.
Oh, that's
How come
rich.
all these
That's nice.
phrases are going over and over and over again? I forgot that.
Beautiful. If you find it again, let me know. I'd love to see it.
I will.
That's great. Great
Okay.
point. Thank you for that. That's excellent. Good stuff. Shelley, go ahead.
Okay, I'm a little confused. You said that it's very important whether the name is used or whether they're just referred to, say, as a brother or a girl.
And the
or
relational element.
Okay, what's the difference? What's Torah trying to tell us with this?
There's a certain, I think, a subtle communication about proximity and distance in terms of relationships in this story. They refer to her as objectified as the girl. They didn't say we want to ask Rivka, an individual with a personality. There's a certain, like, they've already made their peace that let's ask the girl. We're here, she's there, we're already just calling her the girl. The young maiden, the Na'ara. They didn't use her personal name. We'll find various examples in the Torah where a name is used or not used as trying to convey to us on a certain subtle level whether the people are being described in the foreground or the background, and whether the relationship between them is close or far.
Okay, but it's different in other times in Tanakh. Say, for example, the mother of Shimshon. She is never given a name. The father is given a name, and yet it's the mother that's on a higher level in the story.
That is true, and I'd have to explain that in a Shimshon context. Why is the Eshet Manoach? I know you feel I'm probably punting on this, but I want to stay over here. I don't want to go over to Sefer Shoftim, but you're right. That is a question there. Why is she just called the Eshet Manoach the whole time?
Okay, so there are times then when the name is used, but it's also not used, which is different from the times when the name is never used.
Right, exactly. But here, the point is, she's called Rivka, she's not called Rivka, she's called Rivka, she's not called Rivka. And my point is just that there's a subtlety here about suddenly Lavan and his mother, who's never named, right? She's the wife of Betuel, she's not named here, has receded. You don't use his name. He is just related to her. He's her brother. He's looking out for her, or he's looking out for himself, depending. Yeah, just depending on how you want to view it. And of course, it's sort of both true. He wants the cash payout. Seems to be a big feature of the family dynamic, and certainly in the interaction with Eved Avram. Look, when they send her, they mention her name, and they don't mention the Minika's name. Right, the Meineket is not mentioned here. Later on, Parshat Vayishlach, it says that Meineket Rivka passed away, right? And seems to be her name is Devorah. We don't have it here. Just making that point out. Now, when she leaves, Pasuk Samach, they gave her a bracha. Vayevarchu et Rivka, vayomru la, achotenu atayila alfei revava, v'yirash zarech et sha'ar sonav. This bracha, by the by, is a bracha that in many communities, it's the tradition that at a Jewish wedding, when the kala, when they have the lowering of the veil, the bedekin, so this is the bracha that's given to the kala by her father, by other relatives. Our sister, may you multiply to the thousands and the tens of thousands, and may your progeny inherit the gates of those who hate them, essentially. So there's a Rashi here that may or may not be in Rashi. It's not in the original manuscripts of Rashi, the first printing based on the manuscripts, called Defus Rishon. It's interesting to know about this. Obviously, the marginalia on commentaries of Rashi sometimes got pushed into the commentary of Rashi itself. I mean, this is typical. I have a sefer, so on the side of the sefer, I write my little notes. But if everything is handwritten in a later generation for various reasons, certainly once the printing press, the advent of the printing press, it's not always clear who wrote the actual script of the commentary and who wrote the notes. So sometimes they decide, well, who wrote it? A student of the teacher. So either the teacher said it in the shiur, in the class, or something like that, or maybe it really was the teacher put their own edit, right? In a world where everything's handwritten. So it gets pushed in sometimes. And there's a whole study. There's a professor named Eliezer Twito in Eretz Yisrael, in Hebrew University, did an entire study of the different Girsaot of Rashi. Dr. Chevelle did some work on this. The version we have, the Torah Chaim Chumash, I think is really Dr. Chevelle's version. So for instance, Rashi's grandson, Rashbam, has exactly the following commentary, but it's quoted in the name of Rav Yosef Rav Shimon Kara. Rav Yosef Kara was another medieval exegete, but it's not Rashi. But it got somehow sort of folded into the work of Rashi with various manuscripts, earlier manuscripts of Rashi. And again, there's like a whole study, what's original Rashi, what's in Rashi's Beit Midrash. This happens, by the way, on Shas as well, at various Masechtas, where we have two versions of Rashi. We have Rashi that the Rum family chose to print in the Vilna Shas. And they have a manuscript. Just now was in the Daf Yomi, they were learning Moed Katan. So it says Rashi on top of that page. But when you read in the various commentaries, they'll tell you, no, well, that's Rashi on the page. There's another manuscript that has a different version of Rashi. How could it be? Either he wrote his commentary twice, or someone in the Beit Midrash of Rashi took notes on the shiur. This is what they wrote down. Someone thought that's Rashi because it came from his Beit Midrash, and they wrote it up. Anyway, so Rashi, maybe Rashi, Pasuk Samach, Atayil alfir vava at v'zarech tekablu ota bracha shnemer la'Avraham b'har Moriah. You and your children, your progeny, should receive the exact same bracha which was spoken to Avraham on Har HaMoriah, where it says in chapter 22, Harba arbe et zarech. If you look at it, chapter 22, verse 17, if you flip back there for a minute, you have a Chumash in front of you, right? You have the bracha that Hashem gave to Avraham Avinu, Kivarech avarechecha v'harba arbe et zaracha ki chochvei hashamayim v'chol asher asfat hayam. So I will bless you, God says. I will make your children as multitudinous as the stars in the heavens, v'chol asher asfat hayam, like the sand at the sea. V'yirash zaracha et shar oivav, and your progeny will inherit or possess the gates of their enemies. So Rashi, or maybe Rabbi Yosef Kara, writes that this is the same beracha. And here's, of course, a question, whether it's Rashi or it's not actually Rashi. Does anyone really think on the level of Pshat that Lavan and his mother are in Aram Naharaim and they know about the Akedah? Is that possible? Is it not possible? What are your thoughts? What would be the case for and the case against? Or better, the case against is much easier to make. The case for is a little bit more challenging. I'm curious what your thoughts are, if you have any, on the matter. Shelly, go ahead. You're muted. I don't hear you.
It would all depend on how many years later this is from the Akedah, because there could very well have been communication. This trade routes, there very well could have been communication between Avraham and his family in Haran.
What's the best indicator of that in the Pshat, that there was communication between them?
The fact that he later finds out about his brother Nahor having children and grandchildren.
Exactly. Right after the Akedah, not 1, 2, 3 psukim later, chapter 22, it actually says so, that Avram got news. So if Avram got news, they didn't get news. It's in verse 20. That's it.
So if
news traveled fast in both directions.
If they're not really horrible people and they do have some kind of monotheistic belief, even if it's...
I lost you there, Shelley. If they're not horrible people and they have some kind of monotheistic belief, you're going to see, even if it's syncretic, you mean, because they also worship other idols, right? Hello? Well, come back to us soon, Shelley. We lost you there in the communication. But I think you were trying to say...
Yes, I was trying to
there.
say that possibly Avraham could have told them about this through the route about the blessing, because they're really not such bad people as some of the commentators say. That the idea that God blessed him, that this Kale that maybe is the head of their pantheon blessed him, they would believe in, and so they actually had heard it.
So it's a famous story, and if it happened in a way that the news was told to other people, the same way Avram Avinu could get the news that he has new relatives, so the news went the other way. And what's new in Avram's family? You're not going to believe it. He finally had a son, and this crazy thing happened. But then Hashem told him not to go through with it. And Malach stopped him. Hashem gave him a bracha. He's going to have a lot of children. Now, if all of that lines up, then it turns out at the end of the story, the last sentence that the family of Rivka Imenu speaks, they knew already that this is a very special family we're marrying into. And the person that we are now sending off our daughter and sister respectively to marry is someone who is destined for greatness. And you know what? We knew all along. When Eliezer comes, he tells them the whole story, right? Nobody says, is this the kid from the Akedah story? You know, is this the young man who was almost slaughtered by his father and Hashem stopped him? None of that happens, which on a certain level sort of makes their, whatever the word is, they played dumb and made like, well, we don't know. And then Hashem Yatzah Davar. But actually they knew about the Akedah. They knew that Yitzchak is this great spiritual person, and Avram Avinu is, right? Of course, the case against is very easy to make, which is they didn't have a clue. They didn't know about it. And just so happens the language is similar between the two stories. That's all. And that's why it's not identical. It's similar, right? They didn't say it'll be like the stars of the sky and the sand of the sea. And it didn't say Shar Oivav, it said Shar Sonav. It's close. Now, how did they happen upon almost the same language? Because it's a nice thing to say to somebody, we hope you'll have many descendants and we hope you'll be successful. And in the ancient Near East, maybe that's the syntax for how you say it.
But they also did say that who are we to stand in the way of God, and they do all this God stuff.
Because of the story that Eliezer told them, right?
Right. So they're thinking, oh, this must be going on. Now, they also might know that Abraham had another son, Ishmael, and they're not sure who. Eliezer, or the servant, never mentions the name of the son, so they may have some doubt as to which son.
Could be. Now, what I want to share with you, which may seem very radical, is that I quoted this just now with maybe too long an introduction. This either was written by Rashi, it wasn't written by Rashi, it was written maybe by Rabbi Yosef Kara or Yosef ben Shimon Kara. So it might not have been, it might have been. Either way, let's try to understand, like, is this based in Pshat? Is this Medrash? What's the case for, the case against? What's astounding is that we have learned together in previous, if you weren't on that shir, so I'll just remind you very quickly that Rashi and Rashbam, his grandson, both claimed to endeavor to make the same thing happen with their commentary, which is to elucidate the pshat, the direct layer of understanding. But we learned together, beginning of Parshat Vayeshev, where the Rashbam has an excursus where he explains a dialogue with his grandfather, where he basically said very respectfully and deferentially to his Zaidi, I know what you think you're doing is pshat, but it's not really pshat. You're doing a lot of quoting of midrashim, and it's not necessarily the pshat of the text itself. And that Rashi, according to Rashbam's testimony, his grandfather said to him, if I had the time, I would make a new commentary because of the pshatim amitchadshim b'chol yom, the direct understandings of the Torah that are renewed all the time. In other words, I'd have to go back and revisit what I've done and what I've said. But who quotes this concept here, that this bracha was a throwback, a known throwback to the story of the Akedah, which again, nobody has a Sefer Torah. It's not written yet. So what do you know from the story? Whatever's in the oral tradition, what was spoken about. Clearly the story, according to Rashbam, I'll read you the words of Rashbam, he writes, Mimech yetzu otam habanim shenemar bahem bishat Akedah. from you should emanate all of the children who were spoken about at the time of the Akedah, the Yirash Zaracha, rather, et Shars Oivav, that your progeny, Yitzchak, Avram's progeny, and Yitzchak, should possess the gates of their enemies. Zeh Perush Rabbi Yosef Bar Shimon Kra. The Rashbam, who is in a certain way, relative to Rashi, an arch Pashtan, meaning he's only interested in the Pshat, he's not quoting you Midrashim, he's not that's important, but it's not what his oeuvre is about. He's about what do the words mean? What does it mean in context of Pshat? Even he here thinks for sure this is a connection back to the Akedah as an oral tradition. I mean, I would have thought that on the level of Pshat, it's easier to argue against such a thing and say, well, it's a nice tradition, but how do you know that they knew about it? And this line, according to Rashbam, I would use the term gingerly, is the tell. It's the tell. They did something to show, like we were holding the cards the whole time. We knew that this is what you're talking about. Now, Shelley, you're right. It could have been somehow about Ishmael and not Yitzchak. They never asked, what's this boy's name? You know, I guess, I think if you're a parent and someone wants to marry your daughter, you say like, so what's his name? What's he do for a living? You know, didn't ask any questions, nothing, because they knew or they didn't care. I think they cared, but there's obviously something here. And Rashbam himself says this is a connection back to the Akedah. Again, does that heighten their level of of duplicity, or is that just meant to say that they now understood? They didn't have to ask because they realized that's who the child is, and that it must be Yitzchak. And now the idea that they want to give her a bracha is, we want to connect it back to that story, and we're so honored that she's the one. So they gave her such a bracha, and they sent her on her way. Choliot. Anyway, that's one thing to think about. And now comes the big moment of meeting. Vatakam Rivka v'narotah v'tirkavna al gmalim v'tilachna achrei ha'ish v'yikacha evet et Rivka v'yilach. Rivka gets up. She, with her maidens, plural, she goes onto the camels and she follows after the man. Now he's again ha'ish, and the evet takes Rivka and they go. I would point out a couple of things here. Should have mentioned it earlier, but as soon as we mention the meineket, the nursemaid of someone, it seems to imply, it feeds the case for Rivka being extremely young, right? Which you have a babysitter for. That's what it means. That's what the meineket is. That the wet nurse is coming along. On the other hand, as I pointed out, since in Parshat Vayishlach, the meineket Rivka passes away, which means she's with the family for an extended period of time. Clearly, she has a function. They called her that, but that's not her function the whole time. She was, like I said, she became the governess. She was always with her. She helped her. Whatever it is, it's something along those lines. As they're going on the way, making their way to Yitzchak, he is obviously coming from somewhere else himself, as we learn. V'Yitzchak ba mibo be'er lachai ro'i v'hu yoshev be'eretz hanegev. So Yitzchak is somehow arriving on the scene from a place called Be'er Lachai Ro'i, which is in the Eretz HaNegev. So he's coming from there. Now, what was he doing there? Why is he not in the vicinity? Why do we care where he is, right? So Rashi right here tells us very beautifully that Yitzchak was involved in Shiduchim as well. He went to go get Hagar. Rashi writes, Shalach lavi Hagar la'Avram Avinu she'isa'ena. Now that Sarah Imenu had passed away, very heroically, Yitzchak realizes that Hagar is still around, and he wants his father wants to be happy. Rashi, you're quoting directly from the Medrash. He goes to find Hagar, recalling all the previous tensions with Hagar, the fact that Hagar is Ishmael's mother, that Hagar and Sarah Imenu, there was obviously a problem there, to put it charitably. And what did he do? He went to go to find her, to bring her back in order to have her remarry Avram. And of course, that's further along. That's the next section that starts with Keturah, chapter 25. We won't see that today, but that's how it gets connected with that story, which according to Rashi's read, that's what he's doing there. Not everyone agrees with that, but Rashi quotes that medrash, and he says that's what he was doing there. Could only be for that purpose. Rashbam and others, they just don't quote that. That's not why he was there. It was because they had business interests and to take care of things, and that's that. Okay, Shelley and then Karen. Shelley, go.
Okay, where is Avraham living at this time? Because even if he's going to Be'er Lahai Ro'i for some other, whatever the purpose is, it says in verse 62 that he lives in the South Country. We know that before that, is this where Avraham is living? Because after the Akedah, it seems they went their separate ways. So I want to know whether they went their separate ways or not.
The family certainly had business interests in the Negev, but you're asking, did the family not live together? Was Yitzchak not living where Avram was living?
Yes.
Certainly Avram Avinu, when he dies, is buried in Ma'arat Machpelah, that's for sure. I don't remember it telling us immediately where he was living at this time. The last we heard from Avram Avinu was when he sent off Eliezer, right, to go on the way. And that was right after the passing of Sarah Imenu. And it does not even tell us where that happened. Was that in Hebron, in Kiryat Arba, or is that in Beersheba? And we don't know. Remember that at the end of the Akedah, chapter 22, pasuk, whatever it was, 19, Vayeshev Avram b'Beersheba, Vayakum v'yochel yachdav Beersheba, Vayeshev Avram b'Beersheba. That's where he dwelt. That's where he was working, and that explained, according to some of the commentators, why he went back there to check business interests, etc. And he had to come to find sadly Sari Menu, and having passed away and having to bury her, and the reality that he wasn't there. Others disagreed and said, no, he went to Beersheba then for check the business. Then, of course, he went back home. Sari Menu was living in Kiryat Arba. On the level of Pshat, my answer is we just don't know.
There's no mention of Avraham when Rivka shows up, and it's only about Yitzchak. It's like he's out of the story now. He retired down to Florida, and he's taking a second wife. And in this case, the second wife isn't even Jewish.
Well, again, we'll have to discuss what that means when we get there. But again, the Ramban wants to argue he did not actually go to a place where he was living. He was coming from a place where he was basically doing business. If it said that he was Bami Be'er Lachai, so Bami Be'er Lachai, so that would imply that he lives there. So that's to say he's returning to his city from the place where he had been, which was he had been in Be'er Lachai Ro'i temporarily. And that he does live somewhere in the Negev, he doesn't live at Be'er Lachai Ro'i. And something about the idea that he was constantly going back to this place, to the place of Be'er Lachai Ro'i. It was something that drew him there, and he felt he had to be there for spiritual reasons. Now, what is Be'er Lachai Ro'i? It's a well, but we know this expression because we already know what happened in Be'er Lachai Ro'i. Remember?
Hagar sees the Malach.
Yeah.
The Malach tells her the well, and
that's already a story, right? That she runs away, and she has an encounter with a malach. Right. The truth is, it actually happens twice. Right. The first time is in chapter 16, verse 7. Malach Hashem al ein hamayim bamidbar al ayin b'derech shur. That's one place, right? The second place is in chapter 21, where the conflict happens and she leaves. And that's where it actually uses the expression, right, that the place where they were, that's Hashem speaking to her, right, and giving her the bracha, etc. Right, and it tells us that she is that she finds a be'er mayim in that spot. Right, that's verse 19. Vayifkach Elokim et eineha vater be'er mayim vatelech v'tmalei achem et mayim vatashket hanar. Right, so she was in this place. This is the area which is the B'midbar Be'er Shava. I have that in verse, I should have said that before, verse 14. Right, so she's in that spot, and that's where the encounter happens. That's where not only a malach, but also it sounds like, you know, it uses the language, not just the malach spoke to her, but Vayishma Elokim et kol hanar, Vayikra malach Elokim el hagar min hashamayim, right? Al tiyuki shema Elokim el kol hanar basher husham. And so the idea that they're going, you know, this place, according to Ramban, was like a place that Yitzchak would always go back to David. He thought it was a very spiritual place. Is a beautiful idea, but also reminds us a little bit about the reality that they recognized, all of them, that even though Hagar and Yishmael were not the ones to be chosen to move forward with with Jewish history, they weren't out of the picture completely in terms of God's plan. Remember, Yishmael gets a big bracha from Hashem.
Does God ever talk, or Malach ever talk to Yitzchak? Because you've just said that twice. Hagar has had an encounter with a Malach, which is certainly a very spiritual thing.
Could be.
Sarah really doesn't have an encounter. I mean, she's just eavesdropping. The Malach doesn't actually come to her.
You're talking about when the Malachim come to the house?
Yes, they're not actually talking.
So
to
it is
her.
and it isn't eavesdropping. That's debatable. It's back from the beginning of Parshat Vayera. We talked about that a little bit. The fact that she's part of that nevuah, she's in it, she's in the story, and it's about her, etc. But the idea that, you know, the Nozer Kol Asher T'maleh Chasar Shema B'Kol, she's on some kind of a higher level spiritually. I think we did see and explore. Also, the reality of a malach appearing to someone doesn't mean they're on a high spiritual level. Malachim talked to Bilam. Doesn't mean it was on a high spiritual level, right? So there's, you know, something there. However, that this is the place that is a place for tefillah. Now, is it the place where Hagar and Yishmael, where that happened, or Ramban proposes based on the Targum of Onkelos, it's actually the place where Avram Avinu had planted the Eshel, and that therefore that was a very spiritual place, because it says there at the end of chapter 21 that he made an Eshel means either an orchard, maybe it means he made an inn there, maybe it means he planted a tamarisk tree. That seems to be the pshat, v'tasham Eshel, but then it says he made a mizbeach and called the name of God. Okay, that's the spiritual place. So he had business interests in the Beersheba area. V'inei Yitzchak, v'in Cain, writes Ramban, hamakam ahu hamakam Eshel Avram, v'uli tefillah. It's appropriate for tefillah. V'inei Yitzchak ba min habe'er hahi el ir acher sh'rayta b'derech iro. Therefore, he was coming back at exactly that time. He was going out to have conversation in the field with his friends, with his loved ones who were there. He saw them coming. They really came together. Then he brought her into the tent, as we're going to read. Okay, let me give Debbie a chance, and then Shelley again. Debbie, I don't hear you. You muted. Yeah.
In studying this with Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, when the question of the disappearance of Abraham occurred, and I don't know if this is a brisk interpretation or, but it makes sense to me, is that the lessons, the Torah is all about what we're supposed to learn from it. And Abraham certainly, and Sarah, give us many lessons to model our lives by. And at that point, after Sarah died, the reason Abraham disappears is because the lessons are
Yeah.
over in
Yeah,
terms
yeah,
of
yeah.
what-
Okay, wait, we're not done with Avram, though. We're going to come back to Avram, but hold that point. You're going to have to say it when we get to the last section about Avram, but you're quite right. He's certainly receded here, right? Receded. I don't say disappeared, but he receded. We don't hear him. But yeah, but you're making an excellent point. We're going to have to come back to it. We come back again to the story of what happens at the end of the when Avram passes away. The idea here, though, is like it's not entirely clear. What does it mean? Yitzchak ba mibo be'er lachayro'i. He came from coming from be'er lachayro'i, from a tent, from a well, which is the well of the vision of the living, something like that, right? Could have just had a name, or it could be that it is in fact related to something that was transpiring. By the way, the Rashbam thinks this might have been the first time the Malach came to Hagar from that place, that area, because it describes in chapter 16 that Avram moved from Arza Negev and he lived between Kadesh and Shur, two places. And this is Al Ein Hamayim that was in Midbar Shur. But of course, for Rashbam, this is not about going back to a place to pray. It was somewhere where they had business interests. So he went there to go see what was going on. And he came back and, and then he came to, he encountered them on the road, right? With an element of surprise, if you will. So there's something here, in terms of the fact that they're meeting, but Rashi already wants you to know the symmetry that Yitzchak found out. My father is busy trying to help me to continue with my life. What can I do to help him continue with his life?
Rabbi, can I line up too for questions?
Helen, by all means, closing comments, because I see it's already come up on 10 o'clock. I have a hard stop today.
Okay. It seems so strange that Abraham, putting all that effort with Eliezer about creating this deal, that at the point of checking out this shidduch, he's not around.
What do you mean not around? He sent Eliezer to do it because he says he wasn't going to leave town to go do it. He wasn't going to leave Israel to make that happen.
But I want to see Abraham looking at Rivka at the fruits of his deal.
Okay, we have to. That's what Debbie was going towards as well. It seems that Avram Vinu, it's my language, but it's Debbie's idea that she heard from Rav Moshe Soloveitchik. I completely agree with. Avram Vinu has receded here. And what Eliezer found the Torah's de-emphasized. Now, it so happens they met each other on the way, right? It does say they met each other on the way. Yitzchak was coming here. They were going there. They met each other. So that wasn't planned in a certain way. Shamayim, I guess, planned, but Avram's not there. Then in the middle of the road. Now the question is, when they came back, why don't we read that Rivka was introduced to Avraham and he met her and he gave her a bracha and he offered her some cake, something. You don't have that story. Why not? Why is that missing? Did it not happen? Or is there a reason why the Torah at this point no longer needs to tell us about that aspect of it to fill in a gap in a story for our needs, because there isn't a story with a lesson in it? That is the point of the Torah, which is to give the lessons. We have to come back and see it next week, though, because I'm so sorry. I'm out of time. I must run.
Okay.
Thursday, God willing, we are on for this Thursday. Just letting you know from now, the following 2 Thursdays, believe it or not, I have conflicts. So I'm not sure what we're going to do about the shiur. So this Thursday, yes, a shiur, but March 3rd, and I guess March, what would it be? 10th or 11th, 10th. We will not be able to have a shiur on those 2 Thursdays, but Mondays, we're going to keep on going. And that's that. Okay.